Okay, to get started, I will be using 3 ancho chilies, and these just came in a 1.5 ounce package. I'm also using chile arbol, and I will also be using 5 guajillo chiles. Now, you don't have to use this combination of dried chiles, but I like it. You could just use guajillo chiles and that'll get the job done. By the way, I've removed all the seeds and rinsed these dried chilies well, because when they do come in the packages, most times they come very dusty and with debris, so you want to make sure you clean them first. I also want to add that this combination of dried chilies is very mild. The pozole is not spicy at all, just for those of you that have asked in my last video. Okay, so what I'm going to do is place all of my dried chiles in a pot of water on the stove, and then I am going to bring the water up to a boil. By the way, if you are looking for the ingredients and measurements to this recipe, please check the description below this video. I also like to include helpful tips and links to other recipes that I think you might like. Okay, so at this point my water is finally boiling, so I am going to turn off the heat, cover it with a lid, and I am going to allow my chilies to steep for at least 30 minutes. I usually do this first and let them soak for a good 45 minutes to an hour, just to make sure they get soft and pliable and are a lot easier to puree. Okay, so the next ingredient I will be using is the chicken. Here I have some bone-in thighs, and I will be using a mixture of chicken today, and ultimately it is around 4 to 4.5 pounds of chicken that you'll want to use in this recipe. So I have some bone-in chicken thighs, drumsticks, and boneless, skinless chicken breast. You can use a whole fryer and just break it down. You can use just legs, thighs, or just all chicken breast. You don't have to use bone-in, but I will say this. When you are boiling the chicken, the bones do add great flavor to the broth, so bear that in mind. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take my chicken and I'm going to start boiling it. On the stove, I have an 8-quart pot filled with around 4.5 to 5 quarts of water. I think it's more close to 4.5 quarts of water. And I'm just going to place my chicken into my pot, and I will be adding 1 tablespoon of salt, and I'm going to allow it to boil for an hour. Now, when I say boil for an hour, it doesn't mean from the time the chicken gets into the pot and then you start timing it. Actually, you want to bring the water up to a rolling, simmering boil, then start counting your hour. So in goes my salt, and I'm just going to start with a tablespoon. And ultimately what I'm doing is giving the chicken a head start, because I do want this falling off the bone by the time everything is said and done. So once your water starts to boil, cook your chicken for 1 hour. By the way, I am boiling this on a medium heat. I'm not going to do a hard boil, and it's not on a high heat. Everything at a medium heat, because you don't want any spillage. Okay, so 30 minutes into my rolling boil here, and there is scum and foam, so I'm going to remove that. Now, it is up to you if you want to fuss with your broth the way I do. It'll still come out great if you don't remove this. I know my grandfather would always make pozole, and trust me, he wasn't fussing over foam, and it still came out great, and we all survived. But this is an extra step I like to do with my broth. And I also will be skimming off any fat that floats to the surface as well. By the way, I want to mention that I am boiling my chicken uncovered. I didn't cover it. Sometimes I cover it, but I think when I added the chicken, I didn't want the water to spill over, so I just left it uncovered. But you can do what you like. Sometimes I cover it and boil it. Okay, moving on to my chili puree. So all of my chilies are in the blender, and I did remove all of the steeping liquid. I'm not going to use that to help things blend. I'm actually going to use some of the broth from the boiling chicken. But the other ingredients that will be going into the blender, here I have 7 cloves of fresh garlic, 1 tablespoon of Mexican oregano, and half of a large onion, roughly chopped. That will be going into the blender, and I'm going to puree everything together. so everything is added to the blender. Now I'm going to add 1.5 cups or 12 ounces of that boiling liquid from my boiling chicken. And this will just help everything puree, and it adds that chicken broth flavor. Okay, so I have pureed everything together, and here is the end result. Now at this point, your puree is ready to go into the pot whenever it's time. But again, another fussy thing I like to do is sieve my puree just to remove anything that did not get blended, like the chili skin or maybe some of the oregano. So I added an additional cup to the sieve to help move things along and strain it. Again, you do not have to do this, but it's just something I like to do just to maintain a cleaner broth. Okay, so here's what I'm left with. My puree is ready. Okay, on to the next ingredients I will be using. I'm going to be adding white hominy. You don't have to use white hominy, this is just what I had. And this is a 15.5 ounce can of white hominy. I'm using 4 of these cans. I've drained the liquid from the can and actually gave them a rinse, and this is what I have. This is what I'll be adding to this pozole. Ultimately, somewhere, if you have a giant can, use around 5 cups of pozole. Okay, so my hominy is ready. I'm also going to be adding 2 teaspoons of ground cumin, and this is optional, but I like it. 1 teaspoon of onion powder and 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. I know I already have onion and garlic in the puree, but I just like adding extra spices. Okay, and I'm also going to be adding 4 cups of chicken broth. And again, if you want the measurements and ingredients to this recipe, check the description below this video. I will leave everything there for you. Okay, so it has been 1 hour, and as you can see, my chicken is pretty much falling off the bone, and this is exactly how I like it. At this point, if you want to shred your chicken, you can, or just leave it whole. I kind of like a little bit of both. So my chicken is ready. So now what I'm going to do is start adding all of the rest of the ingredients. Now before adding my chicken broth, I like to swish it around in the pot that I had the puree in just to pick up any residual puree that got left behind, and then I pour it right back into the pot. Okay, so everything is added to the pot. I'm giving it a good mix. And at this point, while I was filming, I realized I left out an ingredient earlier, and that's 2 bay leaves. Typically, I like to add the bay leaf when I'm boiling the chicken in the beginning. But you know, as I say, better late than never. So when you add the bay leaf, make sure you add it ahead of time. So at this point, I'm going to bring my pot of pozole up to a rolling boil again. I'm only using somewhere between a medium and medium high heat. And once the liquid comes back to a boil, I'm going to continue cooking it for another 45 minutes. Again, I'm leaving this uncovered because if I walk away and I cover it, I already know it's going to spill over. So I did it uncovered this time. By the way, one thing I like to do is take some of the chicken breast and even some of the chicken thighs, and I like to just take my kitchen shears and go ahead and start chopping it, and I place it back into the pot. That way you get some shredded chicken into the pot and then you have some whole pieces. That's the way I like it, but you can definitely shred all of your chicken or chop it or just leave it whole. Okay. So I'm removing my bay leaves. It has been 45 minutes, and guess what, guys? This pozole is done, and I can't wait to try this. So as you can see, some of it has shredded and some of it is still on the bone, and that's exactly the way I like it. So now let's serve a bowl. Now, I don't know if this is a saying, but if you are ever to look for love at the bottom of a bowl, I think you might start by looking in a bowl of delicious pozole. So I'm just adding some toppings of fresh shredded cabbage, radish, onion, some lime, and of course, the quintessential tostada on the side, and I'm a happy girl. I certainly hope you guys give this recipe a try. I hope you like it, and thanks for watching.